apologizing because I have an interesting command of the English language. How did my time get cut down to 8 minutes, guys? Okay, so I guess we're actually going to just jump into slide number 3. Is there a way to go back? Please. Oh, I don't think my page. So yeah, my name's Mike. I'm the team lead for Força Ukraine. We are a very small, very nimble team of pre-hospital and some hospital providers that come out of the US, and then we team up with Ukrainian teammates to go across Ukraine and basically teach advanced pre-hospital trauma medicine. I also need to apologize to the person controlling the lights, because much like Johnny, I'm a bit of a wanderer, and you guys have been neglected. I would also like to recognize just real quickly a couple of my teammates who are in the audience, Steve, Yulia, and also recognize somebody who should have been in the audience, in fact should have been up here on the stage with me today, Bogdan, who was conscripted earlier this week. So all of the things that we're talking about are particularly acute for us right now. So in the course, my team and I have been coming out since April of 2022 with a different organization, but as Força Ukraine since July 2023. These are all the places we've been. These are some of the units that we've trained. And so what we really specialize in is going far forward to teach advanced pre-hospital trauma medicine. So what I'm really going to talk to you guys about is it's not really the tool or the science or the data. We're really forgetting about the human factor. And until we understand that human factor and why that is problematic, especially in a country and in a fight like this one, we're going to keep solving the problem a little bit wrong. So I would encourage you guys to really, especially you Americans in the room, who have really good, well-educated ideas, we can't just shape the context like we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we're going to talk about why. Part of the reason why I wanted to show the picture at the beginning, not just because I think it's a good one, but it actually comes from Stara Nikolaevka, which is the one way out there on the very far end. We used to launch our training trips out of Pokrovsk and then go east from there. As everybody in this room knows, that's no longer a possibility, right? So we've really had to adapt to what we can do and where we can do it. But we are still doing the best we can to get far forward, and consequently that means we're interacting with and really teaching the people who are doing the act, and putting the tourniquets on, and the ones who are all conveniently sitting in this room in Kyiv going, why can't we just train them more? Why can't we just teach them to do tourniquet conversion? We're going to talk about why, okay? It's not as simple as just a recurring training cycle. You guys know all this. It's a big, big war. 1,000-kilometer front line. Current advances pretty much everywhere. We talked about Pokrovsk, also true down in the Kherson direction, also true up in Sumy, and all of the strikes that are happening. Everybody's shown the pictures, right? We don't need to see these again. This just goes to show that there are wounds that are occurring here that necessitate tourniquets, and there are other things that don't, right? It's that simple. And so, how do we differentiate those two? And how do we teach the audience of learners that I'm going to talk about how to do that effectively? Because it's, again, not as simple as just, hey, just train them more. So, Dr. Steve, down here in the bottom, this is March of 2024, but we've been teaching tourniquet conversion in Ukraine since August of 2022. Basically, our whole model is if you teach people to put a tourniquet on, you must be able to teach them to take it off. Also Yulia, who's sitting in the audience. But there are multifactorial things we must consider when we're talking about training any medical intervention across this country and across that front. First off, and I should have made this clear right at the beginning, I have a singular optic on a very large problem. Right, that 1,000-kilometer front line, even though I've been in and out of Ukraine 8 times, I still only have my optic. I don't have data, but my optic is informed by my group having trained about 2,200 pre-hospital providers across basically since the start of the war, April of 2022, until our last mission trip, which ended October of 2025. So we've talked to a lot of people, we've gathered a lot of anecdotal data, we've talked to a lot of the medics, we've talked to a lot of the people who are on the front. And so again, while we don't have data in the form of pie charts, in the form of graphs, in the form of things that everybody really wants, right? We have a lot of information. And so, what we have learned, what you guys all know to be true, is that there are units that are out there doing incredibly good work. We've heard from some of them today. That is not every unit. We all know this. Most of the point of injury care is done by people who are potentially trained at an ASM level, possibly once before they go to the front. Okay? So that's an incredibly important thing to remember. It's very easy to train tourniquets, right? You can train tourniquets in your downtime, which we encourage them to do. You can go to a single training course, learn how to make those motions, and then repeat those motions in your tent, in your area of work. That is a very simple skill to have repetition on. Tourniquet conversion, you may learn it once in that 4 to 6 hour class. You may get hands on it once in that 4 to 6 hour class, and you almost will not replicate that. There is no, hey, let's do some revision training down the line at some point. Most folks at this point, if you were conscripted, you go through about a 30-day training period, and then you're either getting a little bit more specialized or you're going out to the front. Very little of that time, and I can say this with experience because I've been told by commanders, if my team hadn't come, guys wouldn't get any medical training at all. Okay? So, we have to remember that the people who we are asking to do this at point of injury are maybe ASM qualified. Maybe. You are asking them to deal with some of the most complex wound patterns we've seen in a long time. We've all, again, seen the pictures. The drone injuries are horrific. They are multi-system trauma. And you are asking somebody who, as an example, when we were with the 233rd Training Brigade, which is a dedicated medical training unit, 30 days of actual medic training to make field medics, half of those guys were chaplains. Okay? That is not the population you necessarily associate with them going out and being very high-speed medics. Okay? The people who are actually doing this in the trench, in the blindage, are even less qualified than that. Okay? There is an improvement in training. We're seeing that. We are seeing some trickle down. But by and large, time is a constant factor here. There are a million holes in this dam right now. And there's a deprioritization of anything other than training how to fight. It is the same as anything else. The closest alligator to the boat are the Russians on the other side. Right? The impetus is to train people how to win the fight as opposed to do the medicine afterwards. Okay? This is a big one, and we have to keep this in mind. The current average age of the Ukrainian conscript is about 43 years old, which means they are adult learners. They are not learning in the same way that the 18 to 22-year-old U.S. service member starts their career. These are people who are generally pretty solid in the way that they learn things, and a lot less malleable. And so we have to keep that in mind. We also have to keep in mind the second thing. At least some of that time, considering how long Ukraine has actually been independent from the Soviet Union, falls within that time frame. So most of these folks spent maybe up to 10 years of their life living in a Soviet system. Not just a Soviet influence system, a no-kidding Soviet system. That influences how they process information, how they believe in a hierarchical structure, how there is little regard for autonomy of thought. We've talked many times to medics, hey, we need you to do this. We need you to do this skill. And the response more often than not is, I'd much prefer if somebody else told me what to do. And that kind of gets to the next point. And we hear this everywhere from the medics on the ground all the way up to doctors and hospitals. And that is that the cost of action is higher than the cost of inaction. If I do something and a patient has a bad outcome, it's because of what I did. If I don't do anything and a patient has a bad outcome, well, that's because they were hurt real bad. And so we have to keep these factors in mind when we talk about who we are telling that they need to make these changes, how we educate them, how we actually teach them how to do these differently. We talked about this already. Medicine is deprioritized in favor of combat skills. The other thing I want to jump back to really quickly is, yes, the average age of the conscript is 43, which means that they are harder to teach in some ways. it also comes with a whole bunch of comorbidities that we don't necessarily think about. Teaching tourniquet conversion is not just a skill, it's assessing the underlying viability of your patient, even in the most rudimentary fashion, right? The tourniquet conversion cards that Steve came up with, break it down into 3 very simple steps. Time less than 2 hours, do they have a radial pulse, and are they alert, conscious, right? As advanced medical providers, you know it is more nuanced than that. If I have a radial pulse that's perhaps 120, that is maybe indicative of something different than I just have a radial pulse. But the complication again is that there are also comorbidities that come with being 43 years old. I can say that because I'm over 43. I just spent a week doing CASEVAC with an organization that Steve is the medical director for. And we were doing movement of patients kind of post-stab point. And one of the things that was very interesting, obviously, was the patient demographic that we did see, because it was very indicative of the people we were not seeing. And almost all of them were either very lightly wounded or they were sick. Okay? A lot of underlying conditions, from diabetes to pneumonia to osteoarthritis. But when we talk about who is on the front, it's not just who is doing the skill, it's who's having that skill done to them. And if you're in that 43, 40 or over age category, the impacts of the multi-system trauma are significantly worse than if you're 18 or 20 and made of steel. Okay? We know that to be true. The big thing that we deal with a lot is that there is a protocol dependency, and this is where I want to call out the US folks through no fault of your own. We came up with an incredibly good, contextually brilliant protocol. That has then been adopted as the gold standard for pre-hospital trauma medicine and combat theater. Fantastic. To the gentleman sitting in the room, I've had many friends benefit from the stuff that you've brought to the battlefield. The problem in a place like Ukraine, which is already a hierarchical, protocol-driven society, combined with most medics and most people on the front don't have a whole lot of medical education, is that you will lean on a protocol in a way that it was never meant to be. This now becomes the standard of care, and to the letter of that protocol, that is how I will do medicine. Okay? And one of the things that we have found in our team is that we have to somehow extrapolate best practice medicine out of the incredible T-tri-C protocols that have been designed and make them as contextually appropriate. And one of those things is dealing with these societal and demographic factors. So, how do we solve this problem, right? Like, I just muddied the waters. I was like, oh yeah, tourniquet's good, bad. No, we've got a much bigger problem. And I know that by introducing a bigger problem, it then complicates all of the downstream effects. But here's the truth, guys and ladies. If you don't solve the point of injury problem, all of the other things that we're talking about actually don't matter. If we can't figure out how to do better for the people who are in that trench, the guy who gets 4 to 6 hours of ASM, the stuff that you guys can do in the stab point, the electrical innervation, it's not going to matter. So, we are so used to shaping the theaters that we operate in, and we cannot do that here. How do we now shape what we have, or build our shape around the context? Because it is the context that is driving everything that's happening on it. And part of that context are these factors of who is actually in the trench, who is doing this procedure. We also make the same mistake when we're teaching, and to be honest, and I'll put up my contact information. I'm in room 804 at the hotel if anybody wants to throw me into the impalement pit later. It's fine. I know that people are not going to be super happy to hear this. But we make the same mistake when we're teaching. When we're pushing information out, we make an assumption that it lives much like the US. Oh, they must have some sort of cycle where we can just do retraining. Average age of the current soldier on the front, anybody know? Or average time expectancy of life on the front, anybody? No? It's less than 2 weeks. Please tell me where in that less than 2 week time frame you're going to do remedial education. Please tell me where in that 30 days of I'm just learning everything about how to be a soldier, you train people well enough to do the skill to the expectation that we have for them. It's extremely hard. And so when we come out and we teach and we extrapolate and we tell people how to do things, we have to keep in mind that we're not talking about 18 to 20-year-old US or Native service members. We're talking generally 43-year-old conscripts. And we have to honor that because it is not the same audience. Okay? We need to reinvestigate, like I talked about. The tool is ultimately irregardless, right? Any tool that you have, if you don't address these factors, will have problems endemically baked into it because people don't understand the reason why they're using the tool. So we have to get better at teaching people the why behind the what. We have to learn from the Ukrainians. We have to understand this context. Right? I also teach this stuff in the States. We see the exact same problems. US providers are incredibly well educated, and I'm talking about like pre-hospital folks who are incredibly well educated. We don't have nearly the same real-world experience that you do. Ukrainian providers, generally speaking, have a ton of real-world experience and don't necessarily understand the underlying causes. And I see my timer flashing, so like I said, here's my information. If you guys have follow-on questions, I am in room 804 of the hotel if you were very upset about what I've said today. But yeah, please reach out to me if you have any questions. We lead teams. We'll be back in March of this year, if not before. But one of the things that we do like to do, obviously, is teach out here. And the second thing we really like to do is take those lessons and bring them back to the States. So I appreciate all of your time. Thank you.